Uh, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session, or this panel, on the International Monitoring System sustainment, past, present, and beyond. As you can see here in the panel, we have our very distinguished panelists, former directors of the IMS and former chief of the seismic section. And you cannot imagine how thrilled I am to have them here with me today. These guys have been my mentors, and I have learned a lot from them. So for me, it's a real honor to be sharing this table with them. So the idea is to have an overview of how was their experience. Were they directors of the IMS and chief of seismic of the IMS? And then to hear the perspective of them for the IMS sustainment. So first we have Gerardo Suarez Reynoso from Mexico. He's currently a professor in the Institute of Geophysics of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. He was the first director of the IMS. Then we have Federico Gendel. He was a professor at the OPSICORI, that's the Observatory of Seismology and Volcanology of the National University of Costa Rica, where he was also vice president of the scientific research. And he was the second director of the IMS. And I should say, because he mentioned it, he's happily retired, but very active, as you can see. And then last we have Sergio Barrientos from Chile. He is currently the head of the National Seismological Center at the Chile University. And he was the former, or he is the former chief of the seismic section. We don't have that section anymore. The IMS has been restructured, and probably we can hear a little bit of that restructuring back then. So we are going to start in order of timeline. So we'll start with Gerardo, please.
Thank you, Shirley, and thank you very much for the invitation to this panel, which is a difficult one, I must say. Although it has made me remember many of the things we initiated at the time. And I thank you all for coming here during lunch hour. It's very kind of you. Shirley asked me to remember and mention some anecdotes about those days. And of course, the anecdotes, for obvious reasons, have to do with sustainment. And there was one in particular which, for me, was very important. I see a lot of young faces in the audience, or mostly young faces, which makes me very happy. But there may be some of you who may remember Dr. Frank Pilote. And Dr. Frank Pilote, he was a Cold War warrior, if there was ever one. And he was the scientific director of the AFTAC. And I think he was the creator in many ways of AFTAC's seismological network. And I think it would be an understatement if I said that he was not really a friend of the CTBT and of the IMS in those early days. And one day, I was in the office, probably 3 months into the job. We were just starting to understand what was in front of us. And I got a phone call, and I answered the phone, and he says, "This is Pilote, Suarez?" And I thought it was a radio conversation. I was about to say, "Yes, Suarez, over." But it was, and I said, "Yes, it's me." And he said, "I would like to meet with you." And I said, "Dr. Pilote, I'm delighted. When do you want to come to the office? You just tell me the time, and we'll make some space, and you can meet some of the staff." And he said, "No, I will not set foot in the United Nations." And okay, we said, "Fine. Where do you want to meet?" And he said, "I'm staying at the," and he pronounced it in a very proper manner, "at the Hotel Imperial. Can you come for dinner?" And I said, "Well, I could try that. Yes, of course, why not?" And he said, "There's an American woman working for you, I understand. And some of you may also remember and know her well, Holly Given." And I think that shone a little bit of credibility on me, that I would be accompanied by an American seismologist and a very good scientist at that. So we went, and he was already at the table, and we had not even sat down to look at the menu when he lifted his finger and said, "What I want to see is your sustainment and your operational plan." And we looked at each other and we said, "Sustainment and operational." We didn't know how to build infrasound stations. We were learning how to build infrasound stations. Nobody had built a radionuclide network in the world. Seismology, there was more experience. Hydroacoustic was a military endeavor more than anything else. And well, we said, we don't have one, but we're doing other things. And we didn't think the conversation could be any worse than that, but it did. And we said, we don't have one, but we're doing this. We're writing terms of reference. We're identifying. We're trying to get permission, the famous facility agreement. And he was not interested at all. And in the end, he said, also with his finger pointing, he said, "You won't be able to build anything like the IMS in an international organization like this." I said, well, so we left, and we proved him wrong in the second thing, but he was dead on the target on the first one. We did need to have a sustainment plan. Of course, we were busy. We didn't have staff. The IMS met very cozily around the table in my office. All of us, we met almost daily. We all fitted there. So we had other needs, but his advice, and this is the reason why I mentioned this, his advice was not taken lightly. I think, afterwards we talked about it, we discussed it, and there were several things that came out of that in those early days, even though the drive was build, build, build. And for some of the younger people, this may sound even a little bit outrageous, but the mantra was, we're entering into force in 3 years. So you guys in the IMS better build the stations to be able to validate what the treaty is supposed to do. And it was 3 years. 3 years, every working group B, every working group A, every PrepCom, and even the advisory group. I'm looking for Denis, but so obviously the main drive was somewhere else. But we did start some things. We did start some things that I am glad to see that they have continued. One of them is DOTS, the database of the Technical Secretariat. It was Joachim Schulze in the radionuclide section who came one day to me and he said, we should hire somebody to build a database. And let's start with radionuclide and then we can make it an IMS. And it was Steve Bratt, whom some of you may also remember, also a very good friend still, and a very good scientist, who said, no, let's do something bigger. The IDC has to be involved. So it became DOTS, and he came up with this name of DOTS. So that's Steve. And I will talk a little bit about that. I hope I have the time. We also thought about having an operations center. It was not something as impressive as what the PTS has now, which is absolutely impressive, and I can say that because I have nothing to do with it. But Mario Villagran, who's in here, was spearheaded that effort to have an operations center that collected data from the station operators, which is this link that we need to have to operate stations properly and report in a very specific manner, hierarchical and structured, what failures were present. And also we took a logistics training course from a couple of ex-military guys. Military people are the ones who know logistics, really. And the first thing they said is, okay, explain to us what your problem is. Tell me. So we explained, we have radionuclide stations and they're complex, the germanium detectors, the vacuum pump and this and that. And they said, well, and this is the hydroacoustics and this and that. And they said, well, it's not, you don't have a really big problem. For example, an F-16 has about 1.5 million special engineered parts. And I remember that sentence. And he said, so you don't really have a problem. We keep them flying, so you should be able to keep your network operating. Of course, we didn't have, and we don't have, the logistical support or the funding that the military have to keep the F-16s flying at all costs. But they did mention some things that we finally were able to break through. And it may again sound a little bit trivial today, but for example, open contracts. Open contracts were something that structurally were against the grain of procurement in the United Nations. So for us to ask for an open contract, okay, we identify a manufacturer that can build this type of equipment, we want an open contract for N number of pieces of equipment that we can order. For procurement, this was absolutely unthinkable. This was a recommendation from them, and we managed to win that. And I think it is something that you now have and you have to use in the procurement effort. I was a little bit surprised, I must say, that we heard a very nice presentation yesterday on DOTS, but DOTS, I may be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I offer my sincere apologies, appears to be, continues to be, from what we heard, a baseline sort of database that tells you what type of equipment, you know, the brand, the number, the this and that, when it was changed, but it does not include the failures that that piece of equipment or any other type of equipment has. And that is the fundamental data that is needed. It is really the fundamental data that you need to understand what pieces of equipment are failing and what you need to do and what sort of a budget you want. I am a firm believer of, perhaps because of my own personal training, I am a firm believer of statistics and probability. And I strongly believe that DOTS has to grow and include the failures, also in the very structured and hierarchical manner that it has now, so they can be looked at in the same manner that I think the failures are there in the budget program and the budget performance program. I'm not saying it properly, but I think some of you know what it is. Every single station is listed there, when it was, how much was spent, when it was certified, what problems had it. And it may be very difficult to look at that data, but I think it has to be looked at. And because one thing that I am sure has not changed since I left here, when did we leave, Sergio? 20, I don't know how many years ago, you know. I say it was in the late Cretaceous when the dinosaurs died away, and some of us dinosaurs were resilient enough to still be here. But I am certain that one thing that has not changed is asking for money, okay? I know you've broken the barrier of the zero growth budget, which was the mantra for years, but one thing that I am certain absolutely that has not changed is asking for money. So you have to substantiate why you need money and how much money you need and on what calendars you need money for this revolving sustainment fund that you have. And I'm not saying it right, but I think you know what I mean. And I think the PTS needs to very, very strongly justify that to signatories to be able to get the money. So I really applaud the efforts that IMS is leading together with the IDC and the whole of the PTS, because I see the administrative people involved. And I see also the state signatories very much involved with this effort. So I really applaud it. It's an absolute necessity. You know, everybody ages, our equipment ages. And although some of it is extremely resilient, because it is extremely resilient, many pieces of equipment were installed 25 years ago, and they're still there, they're still running, but still it needs to be kept alive, and we need to know when to change it in an appropriate manner. So once again, I thank you very much, and for those involved in this effort, I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerardo. So now I'm going to give the floor to Sergio, just because they were about the same time. So, and then Federico, you had the restructuring, right, of the IMS. So maybe Sergio first.
So we go by time. That's difficult. Thank you very much. History. Thank you very much, actually, for setting this panel up and inviting me to be here. Thank you very much for being here as well and listening to the things that we have to say. After what Gerardo said, I think it's very difficult to add more things. But I would like to concentrate on some things that were unique at that time. Of course, the mantra was in installations, new certifications. The amount of certifications, we had a target of certification of the stations, that those stations should comply with all the specifications that were given to us. And among them was authentication. That authentication was a new thing. At that time, we did not know about what we had to do to the seismic stations. And authentication was the discussions where should be within the digitizer, outside of the digitizer, how should we build it? These were discussions that we had during those times to decide what to do. Then we developed the standard station interface to make sure that all the elements that were required by the treaty were fulfilled. And then we talk about tamper detection, the vault would be open or and include that into the standard station interface. Things like that we did not face that before in our daily lives. So those were new sort of for us, or for me at least, and for all the seismologists that were working, it was a new requirement. At the beginning, I remember as well that we had to do lots of stuff. The terms of reference, we have to develop all the terms of reference, and we have Holly Given working on those terms of reference. That was one of the other aspects that it was not a daily job that we did as seismologists, but when we entered to work in this organization, it was a new thing. Regarding the amount of site surveys that we have to carry, there were some stations that were working and were part of existing facilities, but there were lots of facilities that did not exist, and we had to do site surveys. I remember one of the staff members that he had to, and Yuri was reminding me that Carl, for instance, came back from one site survey, and at the following day he had to go to another one. It was this type of stress in those times. There were very few people, and as Gerardo says, the entry into force was foreseeable at that moment. We were asked to carry out with the completion of the network, and of course certifications, as I said, was a mantra. Basically, at that time, I don't think Gerardo, that's why he was the director, could think about sustainment. At that point in the seismic section, we only could carry out the work that were asked us to do. We could only see what the plan is, what the plan was for the year, and then carry out that plan, and it was so difficult to keep up and keep up these certifications at the beginning, at the first 3 years or so. It was really hard. I guess regarding sustainment, my only comment would be like there are other networks, seismic networks, and working over there, working in the world, and not only seismic networks, but organizations that have faced this problem. All the important manufacturing plants, for instance, they have sustainment plans, and we can perhaps, at least it's possible to follow a model, follow a sort of a proven exercise that has been working. For instance, there are networks in the countries. Several countries have had these networks running for more than 30 years. So it's one could at least listen to what they had gone through. Basically, these are, I envy the memory of Gerardo. There are so many things that I don't remember at this moment. It was, as I said, years, 20 years ago. So things go fast, very fast. So with that, those comments I would like to end up for a moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergio. Now, Federico, you were handed in a network that was halfway installed, or I don't know how was the percentage. It was more than 3 years, definitely not enter into force. So how was the transition? Because you went through the restructuration of the IMS and several other changes.
Thank you, Xioli, and thank you for everybody being here, listening to us, the old guard. I think that I should thank, I have done that, but emphasize thanking Gerardo and Sergio and all those who were in the early days of setting up the international monitoring system as it is. I cannot, when I think of how hard it must have been just to begin to set all the processes, all the details, the negotiations with the countries. So when I came in 2006, it was, I think I had the benefit of all this early work that was done by Gerardo and Sergio and other colleagues. So my purpose at that time, we were going through a restructuring. I didn't have much to do. It was already cooked when I came in. I remembered my first intervention in the PrepCom was that I mentioned that I felt that I came to a conversation that was already started, so it was like in the middle of a conversation that was. But, well, we accepted the restructuring of the IMS and IDC, and I tried to concentrate on the work that had been done already and try to, on one side, to continue the buildup of the IMS network, the certification process, and there was a lot of work already done. So it was a little bit easier. It was like trying to get the, like Theo said, the low-hanging fruits from the tree, and try to benefit from all that work that was done before. And I think we managed during those, I was only 6 years as the director of the IMS division, but we managed, we had very good people in the engineering section, in the logistics group, and then also the internal computer systems of the CTBT, CTBTO. So there was a lot of things to work and iron. But I think a great amount of work was already in place, so it was a little bit easier to move. Of course, there were problems with solving with member states, discussions, how to speed up the processes of setting up stations, infrasound stations, which were already now being understood a little bit better in the construction. And so it went, I think, without too many problems. I think we were able to construct, build, certify the primary stations, and then the auxiliary stations was something else that had to be dealt with. There were problems of supporting member states where stations were not functioning, how we could do this. We joined it up with the European Union to create a program to help sustain the auxiliary stations in the countries that had problems in maintaining the stations functioning. And then, of course, the big problems with the hydroacoustic stations. Crozet was one of the big problems, recapitalization, getting the monies to be able to confront such a large expenditure. So there were problems, but we managed together, I think, with the member states in the PrepCom to come to solutions. We tried to build the novel gas systems. There were 40 stations. There were problems on where the money was coming from. Had we the right amount of money to go ahead and build the novel gas systems, to develop them, to test, to continue testing the different systems that we could put in place. So it was a lot of work, but I will say that the things that perhaps the challenges are maybe the same with a little different variations, but the main issues to me in the future is, for example, the clear path to the obsolescence issues, how we, as Gerardo said, to include the statistics, include how we can make sure that we know how we have a clear view of what the obsolescence of the system is, how we can have the necessary spare parts. We cannot buy for 20 years ahead. Technology changes very rapidly. So we need to have those necessary parts to be there when it's needed. Of course, funds are important. I think funds for recapitalization are one of the most important things to have. And one thing that I think is very important, because I lived this in Costa Rica when we built our little network. I cannot compare it to the IMS network. But it's the training of operators. Persons who are motivated, who feel that this is my station, that this is something that I'm proud of, that I need to keep running all the time, to dedicate time to make sure that the data that is flowing through the system has the quality, that the data is being received in the IDC. So these are, I think, the three things that I will say are some of the challenges that are facing in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the three of you. I'm going to open the floor now for your questions, because I think we all have questions for them. I'm just going to take a few points of what you mentioned. One is we have the zero real growth in the budget since day zero. So we can imagine how challenging it is in a system that has grown a lot and sustained to the future. So we need to be, and I'm looking to a certain person here in the audience. So we know that we need to justify very well, and with all the data possible and all the information possible, for an increase on that and a real budget that covers our needs for sustainment. The second thing that strikes me also is that we have the data, information from our stations, and that is dots. We do failure analysis now, but maybe we don't have the right link between those two things, and maybe we can improve that in order to have a better understanding for the future and for our planning. Also, you mentioned that would give us a better planning for the spare parts, and part of that information that we need might come from two sources. One is, as Sergio mentioned, from other operators, other networks, especially those global networks that had been out there for years, even beyond the time that the PTS has existed, and learn from their experience on how they do it. Also from the manufacturers, as for their statistics and also their information of obsolescence or plans for the future. And station operators are key, not only in the information that we can get from the stations, but also to make them feel that they fulfill a very important role for the network. And training is crucial in order to have a good performing stations. So I take those notes with me, and I hope you have many questions. So please raise your hand so you can get a mic and start making comments or questions. I know there are lots of people here that might have questions. Don't be shy.
While you guys think of questions that presumably we may be able to answer, there's something that surely made me think of. And I always, when I look back at those days with great satisfaction, I must say, but I think that in the IMS we made a mistake, I think, and we made a mistake which was not purely our fault, but we did not manage to convince signatories that it was wiser to have homogeneity of equipment at all stations rather than this diversity we now have. And I can tell you, many of us tried very hard to convince them that it was better to have a single digitizer, to have a single RASA type of station, a single automatic radionuclide station. And we failed, and really the reason was political, that many signatories preferred to have their own piece of equipment regardless. And they had the leverage to impose it on us. But if I think in retrospect, and I look at the problems that you're now facing, I think the job would be a lot easier if there was homogeneity in the equipment purchased for the stations. But it is part of life, it is part of an international organization. But it's, if I ask myself what was one of the drawbacks or one of the mistakes we made, I would point that one out as not having been able to convince signatories of this.
Thank you, Gerardo. Any regrets on your side? Something that we might benefited if you have done something different?
I can put in an example. When I came to the BTS in 2004, I began to work with OSI. And I was in the equipment section. And we had these systems to monitor very small events after a nuclear test, seismic seismometers. And when I realized that the equipment that was bought, the seismometers and the digitizers, they were not going to solve the issue. There were 3 component seismometers, but I began to think, and Mario was one of the persons that we sat together, Mario Yagran, and I told him, this is not going to go anywhere with this. We're not going to be able to measure these nano earthquakes coming from the explosion underground. So we found ways to start digging into these tripartite mini arrays with very high sampling rates. So we had to say, I told the chief of the section, we need to get rid of this. Okay, donate this equipment to member states that might use these seismometers for normal seismic monitoring, but not for this type of. So we changed the whole system. The people from Israel were helping. Manfred Joswick from Stuttgart was also involved in the trying to solve this issue because of the need to record very small motions from the source of an explosion, the nuclear test. So we built this idea of these tripartite mini arrays, which I think are now working very well, and the software has been developed. And so this is something that happened during the time I was there. And then I left for the IMS division, but I'm glad to still see some of the posters where they present this. And this is one of the things that we managed to sell to the member states, that all the equipment that was bought already, we have to just change it or remove it or donate it to other member states.
Can someone help us with the mic? Thank you, Mario. So, over there. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a really interesting discussion. I'm from a power station in the UK, and we have to deal with aging and obsolescence on a daily basis, really. So our station was designed in the 60s and built in the 70s. And so, there's a lot of components which are no longer supported. And, we have to find alternative components to which meet the same specification. And I was just wondering whether, two questions really. One, can you tell us a bit about the successes you've had with engaging with OEMs to highlight when things may become obsolete and the relationships there and the importance of that? And secondly, I thought there was a really interesting point you made about the engagement of the operators and having pride in the equipment they run. You know, because when you instill that pride, they will look after it better. They'll highlight any issues. And can you speak about how you've managed to instill that pride in the operators and some of the successes you've got from that?
Sí, bueno, nosotros tenemos algo. Really, yeah, regarding the first part of the question, regarding the obsolescence part of it, we have, I can, again, from that experience, from that time, we were not thinking about probably maintenance in the seismic section, probably we were so busy doing other stuff. But later on, in my experience, we have contacted the manufacturers, so have them estimate what is the time to mean failure of the different components, and we have that information in some cases, but in general they say, oh, I know they can last 20 or 25 years, or in other cases, some elements they are mean time of failure of 50 years. So that's the only information that we can gather at this moment. But regarding the information that we can gather with this type of network it probably will help the manufacturers themselves when data is gathered here and analyzed. The second part, the station operator part, you perhaps.
Yeah, well, regarding with the station operators, I think that the issue is complicated. It's a human resource that we need to stimulate to make sure that, because I think this is one of the important things, that the station operator feels, okay, this is my station. I'm really proud to be part of this. But you have the primary stations, which are handled directly with these contracts between the BTS and the member state. But then you have also the auxiliary stations in the case of seismic stations. And these are usually run by universities or different institutes. But I will say that in general, how to motivate the station operators, how to give them the right amount of information regarding the equipment they have. This maybe understand these issues of obsolescence also. When a seismometer begins to have problems, or when a digitizer, that they can understand that it's just not, come and turn the switch on and off, but understand the concept of the station that they are running. And this is important because this empowers them to actually do a much better work. And then the other problem, of course, is the people are sometimes moved from one place to another. They are promoted, or so this has to be a continuous process of forming human resources that can take care of the station and the operations.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask from the presenters, the stations that are there were determined by the treaty. From your view, is that an optimal system, or what would you advise as we move forward? And then the other issue is 20 years ago, where the stations are, or 10 years, depending on when your station was put up, land use planning was not an issue. Currently, there's a lot of change in terms of land use, meaning the station that was very good when it was set up 20 years ago may now be compromised in terms of noise level due to encroachment by population and etc. Is there something that maybe the IMS is putting in place to convince the state signatories to move these stations from their location when this happens, which could be very close? Thank you.
Yes, please. I was going to comment that those were my two questions if nobody made them. So I'm really glad you did.
Well, the answer to your first question, in my opinion, yeah, and now I have the benefit that I don't have to be politically correct. I'm a simple professor. So. The answer is yes and no. Frankly, some stations were placed where they were placed again because some signatories decided that they wanted stations at a certain place. And I prefer not, even though I am not very politically correct, I will not give specific examples, but if we had not had any of these boundary conditions, political boundary conditions, particularly in the seismic, I think we would have done it differently. And no, I think the distribution is very good. For example, in the technologies which we didn't have. For example, infrasound we didn't have. And if you look at the distribution of infrasound stations on the typical IMS map, it's very homogeneous. With a few exceptions, it's very good. And the same goes for radionuclide. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. And on the location, you're right. I mean, it's not the same what happened a few years back. For example, a radionuclide station that was isolated and was not downwind from certain polluting factors, or a seismic station that was not encroached by the population. But see, that is a very, very thorny issue. I forget the exact number, but it was close to maybe 70% of the stations, of the coordinates of the stations in the treaty that we could simply not install. And there I can give some specific examples. For example, the infrasound station in Germany, turns out that if we followed the coordinates, it would end up in the Czech Republic. Or many of the radionuclide stations, if we had followed specifically the coordinates in the treaty that are still in the treaty, then on some islands we would have to figure out, and that was a challenge, we thought, to put radionuclide stations out at sea, because the coordinates were wrong, because they were done in Geneva, probably in a meeting room on a map, in times prior to Google and so on, and so Earth and so on and so forth. So it was, believe me, it was a huge political problem when we came back to Working Group B and the prep and we said we cannot install this and that because of whatever reason. I gave two extremes, one that were out at sea and others that fell in different countries, and they said no, you can't change that. Some delegations said you cannot change that. It's in the treaty, and you cannot change the treaty. Only the state parties can change it after the first conference of state parties. Our lawyers came up with a very interesting and creative solution that this was temporary or something. I can't give you the legal explanation because it's really baroque, but it will be the first conference of the state parties that will make the change. So I suppose that if some stations have to be moved, and now I understand you call it revalidation, then you would have to follow the same exercise and say, for technical reasons, if we need to revalidate, we move them, but it will go into this batch of about 70% of the stations that have different coordinates for the reasons that I explained.
Can you hear me? Oh, yes, yes. Federico, since you mentioned obsolescence, that reminds me to the time when I was a delegate at Working Group B, and Natalie Brayley was teaching us in obsolescence management, giving us all a bad headache in that regard. And I'm wondering what has happened in between, because as I followed that, when she left the IMS at that time, so it feels for me that it disappeared a little bit from the agenda, unfortunately. And looking back at that time, so of course, personally, I had a bad headache with all that. But now I think it's clear that was extremely valuable. And unfortunately, I have the impression that we may lost maybe 10 years or more. So because I have the feeling that we didn't continue in that regard. And I'm wondering what will be or your recommendations, or what are the plans you would recommend to the IMS? Thanks.
Yeah, it's true that, well, it happens not only in the IMS, but it happens in governments also when they change from one political party to another. Things happen to go maybe not in the right way. But I think institutional memory is very important. And unfortunately, because we have this 7-year rule and turning people up and replacing them, when you arrive at the BTS and you start working, you begin to understand how things work and how things are distributed, who's the boss and who you can talk to, and where the executive secretary sits. And so you become familiar with the business. And then you progress along the way, and then you begin to learn more. You begin to put your own ideas forward. And then it comes the time that something is going along. I think Natalie really was an excellent, a little bit controversial sometimes. She was a woman from the military, and there were some confrontations that I had to, as a director, calm down. But she was, I think, really working very, very much on this issue of obsolescence, on trying to figure out where we should put in some depots and how to make sure that the customs issues were solved, because sometimes things will sit too long in the customs. But the obsolescence is one of the things that she was really working hard for. Unfortunately, comes the time that you have to go, and then the next person, there's no time for like 6 months, I will say a minimum time between one person leaving and one person coming on board. So yeah, it's a pity that this institutional memory in most cases is lost because of this. Solutions, it's up to the member states to validate this issue. I always thought that we should try to keep those. I mean, management, you can get managers. For me, it was no problem to leave my job and go away. But for those who have the technical expertise, we see one case here, Yuri, to keep them, to make sure that somehow we can prolong the time that they stay with us at the BTS, because then the contribution is more solid. You can then, like you said, you feel like we lost 10 years. Oh, maybe that's your feeling, and I think it's very valid. So these are the things that we need to figure out also. It's not only the part of the technical capacity of the BTS, but also how member states want things to be conducted, and this is, I think it's important.
Okay, thank you. Gladys from Kenya. Well, I was just thinking that in most cases we consider data analysis as an NDC responsibility, but in terms of station maintenance, data analysis, i.e. looking at the data and the quality of the data, is very important. So would the IMS look at possibilities of giving minimum support in terms of data analysis for the station operators to be able to maintain the stations properly, not to be able necessarily to run the NDCs, which are the responsibilities of the country? So that way then, the station operators will be very conversant, or rather will have some understanding of how the data should look like. Otherwise, running the station as a black box and the data center separately leads to a gap in terms of data quality. So maybe the two should be somehow connected and not totally dependent. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'm not going to comment it because I'm not just the moderator. So if you want to comment on this topic, on the importance of the station operators to also have some training on data analysis or data appreciation. So
I can take that part of it. So thank you very much for your question. I would like to take advantage that I have the microphone and come back to your previous question. The previous question was about how to keep the station if that's not coincide with the treaty coordinates. We had some examples as well of the station being with the coordinates staying in the downtown of a city. So for a seismic section, for a seismic station, and it was so unthinkable to put a seismic station downtown because the amount of noise would be terrible. And in addition, the other part that we are facing in some, particularly in my country, is vandalism. Vandalism is producing a tremendous damage to the system. We have just to give an example. No, I don't want to say that this is everywhere, but we have this station vandalized twice. We have brought it up again to the same standards, but solar panels and batteries are taken because it can be used somewhere else. So these are the things that the organization should face as well. As we as a local, we have learned that perhaps it's not the optimum to keep a station in the optimum place because it's quiet, very quiet, and nobody lives around. And instead of sacrificing the technical quality of the site, to move it to somewhere else where can be secure, can be safe, somebody can watch it. So these are things that probably the organization should look at because these things are not static. They are evolving. They are dynamic. There are certain areas that are more prone or maybe exposed to vandalism than others. This is another comment that I wanted to mention. So I'll leave the other question if you want to.
Well, it's regarding the training the operators of the stations. I think it should be the person who is managing the station should understand what the whole process is through. But I think, as you mentioned on data, if I understood correct, on data analysis, how the operator should be trained also in understanding what is coming in and what is coming out of the station. I think it's important, yeah. I think it's important that the person, I will say that in most cases, I am aware, for example, stations in my country, in Costa Rica, it's a university institute, a research institute that is keeping the whole network for the country, and it's the station operator of the AS25, which is auxiliary station. So this is people who are trained at the seismology level, for example. They have proper university training, so they understand. But in other countries, maybe that is more a technical person who is operating the station. But I would say that the better the operator is trained in the whole sense of what the station means and what the data provided, that the data that is being gathered and sent to Vienna is contributing to, maybe then it's a little bit more understandable for the person who's managing the station. And I think it benefits.
Guillermo, then Yuri, and then over here.
Thank you. So this session is also called the Beyond part of sustainment, and I would like to ask you two questions. In your time, you had a vision, and now we are here 20 years later. I'd like to know how do you feel where we are today compared to what you felt we could do 20 years ago? That's one. And the other, I know you're still very active, so what do you think we will be in the next 25 years? I mean, last year we celebrated our 25 years anniversary, and we did a lot of work, and this current drive to get it right this time with the sustainment plan is aiming, and we hope it will be good enough to be proud in the next 25 years. So I'd like to pick your brains and tell me what you expect will be in the future. Thanks.
Well, I have to be fair because, you know, you asked me how you are today, and it is very easy to be overcritical. But I think there's work to be done. And I think you have recognized that there is work to be done because there is a task force. It's a task force formed not only by PTS personnel from a broad spectrum, which was nice. I was very happy to see the director of administration, always a key person to have on board, together with IMS, IDC, and OSI people, and state signatories. So, you know, quite frankly, it's perhaps a bit late, but I'm very, very, very happy that this is being done, that you're giving yourselves a 2-year period, and I trust very much from what I have heard that you will not come with a magic wand. I mean, believe me, I was extremely disappointed. I was very concerned about my Chilean friends during the Maule earthquake, and we were looking at the data in Mexico, but I couldn't help thinking, you know, whoa, Juan Fernandez was wiped out, and you know, we chose the site so carefully. I went twice with my colleagues to look at the landing sites for the cable and to find the perfect location in a very difficult place for the central facility for the infrasound station, and everything was wiped out. You can't do anything with it. People who deal with failures in electronic equipment, they always use this bathtub analogy. You know, you have the infant mortality, and then it reduces very sharply, and then it rises again as the equipment becomes obsolete, and everybody uses it, from the people who manufacture televisions to people who manufacture very sophisticated equipment. But there's a straight line of catastrophic failure that you cannot ignore. So I think it's high time that this was done, and I commend you for doing it. And where we will be in 25 years, well, let me count. Well, it'll be difficult. But anyway, I do hope that we will be proud that the treaty has entered into force, that you have been able to revamp the stations with more modern equipment, probably more resilient. And I have to give a little bit of an advertisement. I am also part of the scientific advisory group of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And I do hope that that treaty will also enter into force in 25 years, and we get rid of nuclear weapons altogether.
First of all, I would like to say that I'm very happy to see 3 fellows who have been working together for a long time in the initiation of the IMS built-up program. It was really brilliant time to work, and I think we have achieved something. And so I would like to add a few words, if you allow me, about the data quality question that you asked. IMS itself has never been involved in the software of IDC. They're doing processing of the data. However, what we cared a lot about the data quality of the data providing from the waveform technology stations to IDC purposes. So I have to remind that we have been working, and we continue to work in the framework of the operational manual, where there is a special appendices saying about the data quality, how it should be coming from all type of the waveform instrumentation, sensors, digitizers, timing systems, etc., etc. And over the time of the initiation of the build-up program for IMS, we've been very careful about compliance with that requirements for any type of the equipment which came online for the installation business. And I will not be mistaken saying that, for example, all digitizers used in the IMS network, including those stations we are running and built from scratch on our own, and for example, bilateral stations from AFTAC, we have been testing, look at the testing results of all equipment used at that station. We have been doing the thorough work in cooperation with Sandia National Laboratory, which had contributed a lot on the quality assurance plan. And I hope IMS will continue doing the same way, because market is developing. You are getting new components of the equipment, you are getting new sensors, new digitizers, and this thorough testing of this component will be, I would guess, a key component to assure the good quality of the data provided for IDC businesses. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. And one last question over here, or comment.
Thank you. I'm Bob Glinsky, and I'm the chief of the engineering division at AFTEC. And I'm dating myself here. I work for Dr. Palat, I work for Dr. Russell, and I was military in AFTEC at Depot Engineering. And a gentleman named Dr. Kimmerite hired me back into AFTEC in 1998. You all know Bob. I'll let you know Bob is doing very well. I saw him a couple of months ago. But there's a couple of points I want to make, comments really. And one is on training. Many of the AFTEC stations, as you well know, were run by military many years ago, and we pulled the military out and we handed all our stations over to our host. Only 2 stations right now are run by military, Australia and Alaska. I saw the writing on the wall, so we created an extensive training system in Pinedale, Wyoming. We have 7 boreholes, we have radio relay, and we have a complete NDC separate from the operational system. So what we've done over the years is we fund this, we pay for our hosts to come to Pinedale, and we put them through 2 or 3 weeks of analyst and maintenance training. And so we rotate through all of our bilateral partners, Koreans, Turks, Thais, all of them. We bring them all through. In fact, this year, we have Botswana and South Africa coming to Pinedale for training this summer. So that is one point I want to make. And yes, training is very important. And we found that the hosts are very capable, which has cut down on a requirement for our people to go to these countries and saving us a lot of money in the long run. So it's worked out very well. Yes, training is very important. The second point I want to make is I attended the O&M workshop last November, and I was happy to see that the emphasis was on sustainment finally. So I'm happy to see that there's a much greater emphasis on sustainment in the network. And the last point I want to make, you're probably going to ask me this question, when am I going to retire? And I just had this discussion with Georgios the other day, and I said, Georgios, when the North String of Diego gets fixed, I will retire.
Sorry, we have to close with that one, and we will have a big celebration then. So I thank everybody for coming to this session. I hope you enjoy it. I have lots of notes and lots of things to do. Looking forward to the big challenge here and to the lots of works ahead of us. Let me say that the IMS team is a great team, and I'm sure that we're going to deliver something in 2 years. And I thank these 3 great guys that I admire so much and that I've learned so much, and I will keep poking them for more suggestions and more learning. Thank you very much.